Item 2 is public question time. Is there any members of the public wishing to fetch something up that's not on the agenda? No? Okay. And I've got two speakers for the planning applications tonight. Dean Simpson, is that yourself? Thank you. And Valerie Webster. Is that Valerie sat there? Valerie? Mrs. Webster? Are you Mrs. Webster?
No.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, Mrs. Webster isn't here. Okay. Move on. Minutes of the last meeting. Can somebody move them, please? Thank you. Seconder. Thanks. We've no members of the police here tonight. Item 4. Has anybody got anything that they wish to fetch up on police issues that we need to write to the police about? No. Okay. Move on.
Can I just,
sorry.
yes, it would be nice if they would attend a meeting. I mean, we haven't had a meeting with them, you know, so we can discuss. I know we had one last year, but if we've got something, then we can take it back rather than discuss it like this.
Okay, well, we could not grab them and ask them if they will attend next meeting, please. Thank you. I forgot Mrs. Webster's here to talk on the third one, if that's all right with everybody. It's in that order. So, first one. So we've got Mr. Simpson here. So Mr. Simpson, if you'd like to say what you want to.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
Evening everyone, happy new year and to you all. I just want to hopefully cover off without repeating what's in the planning department report, the items which were of concern regarding this particular planning application, reserve matters application from the meeting held on the 30th of November. First one of which, privacy issues from plots 11 and 12, I've been 11 and 12 on the site, to Kerrydale and Wincourt, which were the adjacent opposite houses, existing houses, much back onto Skipton Road. At the last meeting, concerns were raised about the distances from these properties to the existing properties which I've just named. We have worked with the planning department with Catherine and Neil also, and via a revision to the internal first floor space, we've eliminated any habitable first floor windows to the rear elevation at first floor. There's now only one window per plot on those two opposite plots on the first floor of the rear elevation. That being a bathroom window, which will of course have obscure glazing. The bedroom window on that back that was previously on the back elevation, we've moved round onto the gable now, and that hopefully removes any potential for overlooking and invasion of privacy to Kerrydale and Wincourt. The planning department have confirmed that's in their opinion now acceptable, and that the previous concerns relating to that therefore have been eliminated. The next one I just want to touch on, if I may, was the foul water connection into Skipton Road via a route which takes us through Rolls-Royce's, on the edge of Rolls-Royce's field there at the bottom. We understand that there were concerns that the system that we're connected, that they're proposed to connect into there is sort of past its capacity. There was, of course, at the last meeting a response from United Utilities dated 20th of September, which provided acceptance of the proposed point of discharge. We believe, however, that there was some concern that the response from United Utilities was some sort of a box standard response. Therefore, both Catherine Hughes from Pendle and ourselves sought additional substantiation from United Utilities that this had been properly explored. Neil, I'm not sure, I did email Catherine today about whether, I didn't know whether that information from United Utilities, it wasn't in the report previously, I didn't know whether that at risk of repeating things or that the people are aware of. I don't know whether that got into the revised report. Catherine said she was revising the report to include that information in, but I don't know if I've seen it on the website, so I don't know whether people on the committee are aware.
Chair, yes, further information on the update
basically indicates what United Utilities' response to them.
Okay.
Okay, I don't know whether I mean, I can quickly run through that. I believe Catherine Neil got the self-same response from United Utilities that I did. That came back to us on the 21st of the 12th due to the chap at United Utilities being away, so I appreciate it right up to Christmas, and obviously we're right after Christmas. So. If I can just read here what was said. Thank you for an inquiry in relation to the planning application. As your proposal states that surface water will discharge via infiltration, it's only the foul water from your development that will need to be taken into account. The peak foul flow discharge would only be 0.64 litres per second, which is negligible. The 150 sewer becomes a 225 combined sewer after a short distance is laid at a gradient of 1 to 47. Such a sewer has a full bore capacity of roughly 77 litres per second. Assuming that the sewer is already at half capacity at the top end, your proposed discharge would have very little impact on the sewer in question. Furthermore, we have no historic records of internal or external flooding caused by hydraulic inadequacy in the area. Therefore, it is determined that there would be no detrimental impact caused by the proposal development discharging foul water into said sewer. So we've obviously sought additional information from United Utilities to hopefully demonstrate that they haven't just said yes, it's fine when perhaps it might not be. So obviously we're hopeful that information from as new as that may be to members of the committee, I don't know, but that hopefully that can be taken into account. The final item which I think was of issue or concern last time was the method of dealing with surface water on the scheme. Mr Whippo, privy to your Facebook post the day after the last meeting showing the photo from Boxing Day 2015. Obviously the area at the bottom of the Rolls Royce flood field being obviously severely flooded. I have the understanding that the issues on Boxing Day were caused by a bottleneck in the culvert on that runs under Rolls Royce, and that has now been rectified by United Utilities or Yorkshire Water. And I'm not aware that since there's been any suggestion of a repeat of that particular scenario. The soakaway scheme that's proposed has been professionally collated by Paul Waite Associates from Cross Hills, who are highly respected professional consultancy, one of which I believe Neil, I believe Pendle utilise PWA services directly. The scheme was put together following some extensive real-time testing on site to determine the permeability of the substrata on site. It's worth noting that the only areas that will drain into the various soakaways are that which fall onto actual roofs of garages or houses, and also the adoptable section of the access road. All drives and paths are permeable, and as such the water soaks into the ground as it would do now if those buildings were onto the
I'm
field.
sorry, I should have said at the beginning, I can only give you 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, I'm not far off.
Okay.
The effect of the soakaways is the water is diverted down onto the glacial till, which is what the substrata is on that side, at a lower level, and allowed to drain through that into the lower ground, therefore bypassing the upper levels of the strata, which can become saturated. Ultimately, if there is any effect from what we've got now as a field, it is that it creates less water potential for runoff. It's worth noting that this method of dealing with the surface water complies with the hierarchy of the National Planning Policy Framework, which is the first preferred option, being that the top water, if you will, remains on site and is infiltrated away.
Okay.
Apologies, I think I'm there, folks, so I need to keep you. So again, we hope that alleviates any concerns that may be held on that particular aspect. Just in summary, we feel that we've pulled together a very appropriate scheme for the site, which respects all necessary pressures on and around the site and provides an environmentally sound solution. We've worked collaboratively with Pendle to deal and eliminate any concerns that they've had, which hopefully has paved some way towards their recommendation to approve. Thank you for your time.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm available for any questions.
Has anybody got any questions for Mr Simpson? No? Okay, well, we'll move on to the application then. Start,
thank you, Chairman. I'm grateful for Mr Simpson coming along tonight and going through the issues that we've highlighted as being problematic in terms of this development. And I know that it's not Mr Simpson that It is Mr Simpson, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I know it's not Mr Simpson, he was just reporting what United Utilities have said. But I was just astonished to hear that United Utilities have no historic records of internal or external flooding caused by hydraulic inadequacy in the area. Now, Councillor Adams, myself, Councillor Tomwick in latter years have been very much involved with residents who have been flooding out on multiple occasions, and I recall there was one incident where one property was flooded as a consequence. I mean, the first warning they got was the toilet bubbling, and the flooding does involve the rabbit warren of sewers that run under the adjacent area. Now, how it has slipped United Utilities' minds that dozens of properties have been flooded on multiple occasions, and that they say they have no records of internal or external flooding caused by hydraulic inadequacy, I just cannot understand. The combined sewer, which is referred to, goes under the Leeds and Liverpool Canal off Coates Lane, and then it runs along Greenfield Lane and is pumped up to the sewage treatment works. And although United Utilities don't acknowledge it, we've known since Whitworth Way was developed that the adequacy of that section of sewer it's below par. So I really struggle to find words to think about how United Utilities are so blasé about an issue that has affected so many people over so many years. And as Mr Simpson says, part of the issue is the culvert which takes a water course from this side of Skipton Road, under Skipton Road and through the estate, which then discharges at the other side of the canal. And it is true that over the years we have done an enormous amount of work to try and address the issues of that culvert. I have to say, it hasn't been rectified by United Utilities. I'm not aware that they put a penny piece into that. It's been rectified by this council, by Barnsley Town Council, by some other funding bodies putting funding into it. But United Utilities, to my recollection, haven't put a penny piece in. So, on the one hand, the Wastewater Authority, United Utilities, are saying they've no record of any flooding, and on the other hand, they're saying that as far as they're concerned, their infrastructure is adequate for the job. And officially, we can't say anything against that. They're the experts, their infrastructure, they sort of know everything, don't they? But I haven't seen them stood up to the waist in flood water, trying to combat flooding and trying to prevent flooding going into people's houses. And I think that also applies to the surface water and the infiltration. And Mr Simpson says, well, it'll be infiltrated into the glacial tilth. Well, what we have there is boulder clay, and living just a little bit further along the same drumline as this is. Well, I think Councillor Tomwick and I both got very real experience of just what that boulder clay consists of. It's boulders and it's clay. And what you find is the boulders and the clay are not very permeable. Well, in fact, I think I've kept very out of that sentence, are not permeable. So the water that comes not only from the rainfall, but also the water that runs off and over and then off this land, doesn't soak in to any great extent. It's very much a rapid response area, and you have rivers of surface water flowing off this land and then joining that area that floods and still floods to some extent. The protection that we put in there, the increased capacity in the culvert, the flood wall that we built, gives something like 1 in 1,000 year protection, but the modelling that we've done shows that when we have flood events that exceed that 1 in 1,000 years, which is, you know, sort of 0.1%, if you want to look at it that way, then that flood wall will be overtopped and the houses on the opposite side of the road will be flooded. So we can't have any guarantees that there's going to be flooding in the future. And it's frankly laughable to think that the water that falls on the site or flows onto the site will be infiltrated into the groundwater, because it will just add to the enormous puddle that we get there. And in those circumstances, we'll be back out with the sandbags, because that's the only thing that will prevent that flood wall being overtopped and the water going over the road and into the homes on the other side. So, Chairman, I'm very disappointed that officialdom and all the experts are saying that this will be adequate when quite clearly it won't be. And then turning to the concern about the proximity of the dwellings, and we did have a site visit and grateful to have the opportunity to look at that in detail, where there are 2 existing properties that have extensions in the rear gardens which place the new development too close to their homes. Now, I was hopeful that we would see some plans here tonight which would actually shift the development across and take it further away from the existing houses on Skipton Road. But no, what we have is a change in the layout, the internal layout, which will mean that there aren't any habitable rooms overlooking the gardens and the neighbouring properties that are too close, and that they'll have obscure glass and therefore everything will be hunky-dory. Again, I mean, disappointment really doesn't do it. You know, it would have been better if it could have been shunted across the actual properties built further away from the existing ones. Altogether, Chairman, I can't see myself supporting this evening. I just don't think that United Utilities and all the experts are living in the real world. I really obviously that's not a lot to stand on when you get to an appeal. But I think on the proximity issue, that there could have been a better solution than that is proposed this evening. So say, Chairman, I will be voting for it.
Have you got anything to add, Mr Watson, please?
Well, very briefly, Chair, I think most things are contained in the report and update. The Council Whip's absolutely right in the sense of an appeal. When you go into appeals, you have to produce evidence on things. It's going to be very difficult having gone back to the utility company responsible for the drains to say if they're adamant, which I suppose you could say they are, with this, that there is capacity. And what they're saying, it's not caused by hydraulic inadequacy in the area. I think they're saying there's blockages. I think I'm reading between that. But if you go to appeal when you've got the utility company saying yes, you can connect into it, and the levels of flow into it, which are just double that a second, to put it into some context, I think it will be difficult. So in terms of ground conditions, generally, yes, it is clear around here. The vast majority of instances we get where infiltration is considered, it's not appropriate because the infiltration rates are wrong. But I know Paul Waite Associates are a reputable firm. They do work for us in BD, very well renowned. They have done the testing on that. I suppose at the end of the day, we could put the votes in the eating, but if you've done the tests in the right way, then it's difficult again to say that that won't work if the percolation tests are indicating that. So in terms of the relationship between the properties, clearly members will express their own concerns. It's never been from an officer perspective that they're overbearing or too close. It has too close in the sense of affecting a living environment. It is that sets of windows will be overlooking. Now the windows have been moved, the bedroom windows to the side, so they won't overlook. And there are bathroom windows at first floor which look towards two outriggers, but they will be required to be obscurely glazed. So there's always been about loss of privacy as opposed to an adverse impact just between the distances involved between the properties. So Chairman, as that's been resolved, our view is that community problems has now been overcome.
Okay. So, unfortunately, there's no grounds at all there that we can turn down then. But even though I agree with Council with United Utilities on what's the money they paid, to be perfectly honest, and we know that two of the properties are too close to the other houses, but there's nothing we can do about it, is there?
Truly, when we say close, it's close when you get within several metres and they're overbearing. That's one close. That has never been the case. It's been close here because you can, in the initial scheme, you could see into the windows.
Yeah.
Once that has been eradicated from the scheme, then it's difficult then to say that they're too close for what reason.
Yeah. Okay, so, Councillor Goldthorpe.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately, I was away and I couldn't attend the site visit. I like Councillor David Witt is very disappointed over the utility response, I've got to say. You could argue about the distance situation, and I'm sure if it weren't for the drainage and the flooding situation that has occurred, and local councils are fully aware of it over the years, there might be a different view about the distancing. I've got to say that I would support Councillor David Witt's recommendation on this one. So I'd second it.
What, refuse?
Yes.
Are you, Councillor Witt, are you moving that we refuse it?
Yeah.
I don't think you did.
I articulated the fact that I would not be supporting it, Chairman. I didn't actually.
Okay, well, there isn't a motion, so I can't second it.
Right.
No, I'd just like to come in, Madam Chairman. It isn't all that long since last year we had that torrential rain, and the Rolls-Royce Leisure Centre there, they got flooded. So it's always flooding down there, and I don't believe what United Utilities are saying to us. It's our time, we turn around to them and say, right, we're not accepting what you're doing, because it's people's lives they're putting into here. I mean, once is enough to be flooded, but when you look around Gill Meadows and all that area, they've been flooded quite a few times, and it's unacceptable, and I'm not happy, and I won't be supporting this.
So what do we want to do with this application then?
Chairman, in the light of comments from around the room, I would move that it's refused.
On what grounds?
I think, Chairman, the issues that we've got on the paper in front of us are the ones that are pertinent. I fully accept Mr Watson's advice, but I think it's on the proximity to the neighbouring properties, and it's the impact on drainage in the area.
Okay, so that's been moved. I've got a seconder. Yeah. Okay, so
Chairman, I think you're probably expecting to have to say, bearing in mind the advice that I've just given, I think there will be a prospect of costs, particularly on the drainage matter, so my advice is that it would stand the referral to the services should you refuse on this one.
so we'll go to P&L.
It goes to Mr Colshaw, then he has to say whether he agrees with my recommendation.
Right, okay. So it's been moved that we refuse on proximity to neighbouring properties and because of the drainage in the area that we don't agree with United Utilities version of events.
I'm not putting that in the resolution, Chairman.
No. Well, that's the crux of it. Okay, alright, all those in favour? That's carried. So it has been refused.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sorry, referred to
It's
P&L.
not been refused. There's
Been referred.
The meeting is on 20th of January.
20th of January.
Policy and resources, yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Okay. Alright, we'll move on to the third planning application now. Construction of a new treated water storage tank, junction between Manchester Road and Leckwood Lane. Again, we have a site visit on this. We've got Mrs Webster here who wishes to say something. I can give you 5 minutes, Mrs Webster, is that okay?
Okay, what I'm really in here to do is to, I hope the county committee will bear into in its negotiations concerns of local residents. I live at the top end of Park Hill, adjacent to the existing reservoir. Before any sort of decision is made on this application, I hope they will take into account first of all, is it really necessary to replace this reservoir? Or, I mean, you know, do we take United Utilities' word, which seems is a bit dubious on some issues? Anyway, and so has there been any independent guidance on whether this work is necessary? Secondly, on the access, has anybody inquired into what level of usage there will be on this emergency route coming from Manchester Road? I mean, will it just be getting up heavy equipment to start the work and taking it down again? Will it be regular, frequent traffic through Lective Park, which, you know, would impede the amenity of the area very gravely? And the third concern is, I understand that the site of the existing storage tank is a brownfield site, and so could possibly be developed for housing when it's been decommissioned. And that would, I think, be very undesirable for a lot of reasons. And so, I mean, if any application of that came up, is there anything that's
Thank you for that. We did have a site visit here. We did walk down the field at Letcliffe Park, and we also did go on to Park Avenue, and we did speak to a couple of residents there about this. Have you anything? Can we answer Mrs Webster's questions on any of these?
I can answer most of them. I can't give you exact traffic figures, I'm afraid, because I don't think there are exact figures. Has there been any independent verification of the need? So the utility company, we would expect them to be honest with us about that. So no, we haven't actually asked for an independent verification of whether there's a need for it or not. But clearly they are. I would suggest, I don't know, but if you're spending a tremendous amount of money doing this, they tend not to want to do that unless it is necessary. The report that they've submitted does give a good indication that the structure is deteriorating and unfair, so I don't really have any evidence to suggest that that's not the case. It is quite an old structure. In terms of future development, Chairman, I'm afraid I'll have to give an answer that you won't like. It's just we'll have to deal with that when and if it comes forward. You can't, through a current plan application, prevent a future application coming
Yeah,
forward. So
no, I don't appreciate that.
anything.
I just think that's something on the horizon which
Yeah, but it's not something we can do.
very undesirable if it, when it doesn't work.
Certainly nothing's been mentioned to us.
No. But they'll want to get some of the money back, won't they?
Possibly. Okay, Councillor Wick.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I should declare that myself and colleagues at either side of me are members of Barnsley Town Council, and the application does affect land in the ownership of the Town Council. It's not a prejudicial pecuniary interest, but just put that on the table really. In terms of Val Webster's questions, it is the case that a few years ago Yorkshire Water did ask for the what they determined at the time to be a redundant reservoir, asked for it to be included in the strategic housing land availability assessment as potential housing land. So they have previously indicated that they would wish to redevelop the site of the existing reservoir. As a town councillor, myself and colleagues have had discussions with Yorkshire Water, which would lead me to think that they don't have any intentions to pursue a housing development on the remainder of the site, because they intend using that area to deposit the spoil from the new development. Now, that doesn't preclude them from redeveloping the area for housing, but if they're going to put zillions of tons of spoil onto it, it would tend to indicate that they wouldn't want to use the land for housing. But I think, as Mr Watson says, that there aren't any guarantees, and it might be the case that they would move to do that in the future. And then the second thing, Val was asking about the traffic movements, and this relates directly back to what they're doing with the spoil, because if they were bringing thousands of tons of material out of the new excavation, then there'd be considerably more traffic movements than importing the new material in the concrete and what they required to build the new reservoir. And as they intend moving the spoil within the existing site, then it would, to some extent, minimise the number of traffic movements. But nevertheless, this is the feeder reservoir that the water came from MC through big pipes and went into this reservoir, and then this reservoir fed the mains. And my granddad, Tom's great-grandfather, one of his great-grandfathers, was a Barley Craven district councillor at the time. It was during the 1930s, and it perhaps doesn't seem that long ago in those terms, but I suppose in the light of the reservoir, it's getting on a bit, and I understand that MC reservoir has been decommissioned, so if they decommission the main reservoir, I could perhaps understand that the service reservoir is getting into the same condition, and I don't think we can argue against them actually doing the work. In terms of the issues that we had, Chairman, you recall at the previous meeting we highlighted concerns about the impact on residents. Councillor Tom Wick did anyway, and we had the site visit. The day before we did the site visit, they had surveyors there and they were looking at the sections, and I wonder whether Mr Watson can explain what the sections are showing on the projector.
Yeah, it's the top one that people need to look at. What you see on this side, the right-hand side of the screen, is a fence of the boundary with the residents. You can see at the back here, there, going along. So you have, I'm not quite tall enough, just in there is 4 metre, 3 metre back garden to the walls of residents. Then there's a bit more of private garden, and then there's the rented land, which the rented land is there. Now on this scheme, I know it was mentioned on the site visit, on this scheme it doesn't show that land that's rented, a part of that would form part of land that gives back to residents. So what you see there is the back of the fencing, and then the slope would start beyond that. It is steeper than what is there now. As you can see the line that subtends the building, the structure itself is existing ground level. You can see that it does slope up quite sharply away from the existing ground level, so it will appear more stark than what is there, although it's quite tree-lined now, so that does provide a good setting for residents. But there is a gap between the houses and the start of the slope, which will obviously appear artificially quite sharp from the back of the houses, but that will be grass, and there is a path that will be, you can see where the squares are, halfway, not tall enough here, there will be a path along there to for maintenance, but that is just a footpath along there.
Okay.
Chairman, I'm grateful to Mr Watson running through that. I'm not sure that I'm quite clear really. If we go back to the sections, so at the bottom section there, that shows the development in relation to the houses on Park Road. Yeah? What I'm not clear about is the dotted line showing the existing ground level, or?
Yeah.
Yes. So there's quite a distance between the existing horizon and the new horizon, isn't there?
Yeah, that and the top section, that's just a blow up of that bit of the top drawing.
Right. Okay.
So yes, you do. You have the existing gap, which I tried to inarticulately talk about there. Then you have a gap when we walked when we did the site visit on the the top of the wall, and that is where the rented land starts. So there was a gap here that was talked about being by the residents in the visit given to the residents, but that in the proposed scheme isn't the case. The demarcation line will be where the private land and United Utilities land starts there. Then there'll be another 6 or 7 metres, and then the slope will start up to the reservoir.
Chairman, I've got some other concerns, but in terms of the boundary, which would be a hard boundary immediately on the boundary of the curtilage of the properties, would it be possible to condition that boundary being set back so that the fence was, say, at the top of the new slope rather than hard up against the perimeter of the properties?
Chairman, I think you have to give them a small amount of area because they do more than so they'd have to have a bit of a runoff area to turn the mowers around, etc. But you could certainly move it closer to it, but I don't think going right to the base will probably work from a maintenance perspective.
Well, I think put a marker down, Chairman, that and as I understand it, the proposal here, are we waiting for further information? It says delegate grant consent, so presumably we could leave this one over for another committee and say, look, we're not happy with the boundary fence, can that be pushed back? And you know, we throw the ball into Yorkshire Water's court to come back with something that might be perhaps a little bit more acceptable to the residents.
Can we do that?
Certainly, Chairman, we are waiting for the footpath information, the highway in Leckley Park, so we will be waiting for that anyway.
Right, okay, so we can do that. So is
Yeah.
that what you want to do?
And that takes us on to the second issue, Chairman, which is in terms of the pedestrian conflict in Leckley Park, and certainly Mr Watson's taken those issues on board, and you know, we've got to get information back from Yorkshire Water. Obviously we want to see a satisfactory outcome in that respect. Then the final issue, Chairman, is the egress and ingress onto Manchester Road, where the application shows a temporary realignment of that junction to make it safer and more accessible for the heavy vehicles that will be manoeuvring around there. And Chairman, certainly from a Town Council perspective, the Town Council, thinking about the future use of Letcliffe Lane, would very much like to see that to be of a sufficient standard for it to be a permanent improvement, obviously subject to a agreement with the other landowners, but in the discussions that are underway with Yorkshire Water, I wonder whether from a planning perspective that will be pursued as well, please. So I would propose that we defer for 3 reasons.
Yeah.
The issue of the boundary fence, can that be shunted further away from the properties on Raynor Road? On Park Road. The issue of the pedestrian conflict within the park itself, and then the adequacy of the junction, temporary junction with Manchester Road being of sufficient standard to become a permanent access in due course. Can I just flag up one further issue which has been raised with me, perhaps with colleagues in the last week or so, and that is the amount of water. Everything comes back to water, doesn't it? But the people who live on Park Road there have had huge quantities of water flowing off the notice on. It's not a burst reservoir, a burst water main, it's the waterlogged nature of the ground, which has come onto their property from the land above. And certainly residents were concerned that that flooding issue was something that was flagged up at this evening's meeting. Now, I'm pretty sure that Yorkshire Water, because of the nature of the construction, they won't want it to become undermined or affected by surface water issues. So I'm sure that they're going to put adequate drainage in to deal with the necessary outflow. But can we also seek assurances that those issues are satisfactorily addressed when we get the plan to the next meeting?
Okay, everybody agreed on that? Yeah, so we defer it to the next meeting. We defer it to the next meeting and see if we can get all these questions answered. Oh, okay? Yep, alright. Thank you. So we'll go back to the second application now. Caravan site, Lower Greenhill Farm. Again, we have a site visit on this and have a look. I don't really see what we can do about this, but it didn't seem, from my point of view, that it was going to be an issue. Don't know what anyone else thinks. Anybody else on this? No? So, do we move to a proposal? What we're going to do with this? Move it?
I'm reluctant to move it.
Yeah, reluctantly. But, you could, we did have a good look at it on site and you really couldn't see much. So, that's been moved, seconded. Reluctantly. All those in favour? Yeah, okay, that's moved.
Jennifer, did you vote?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll just go on to planning appeals. Note these appeals unless anybody's got any burning issues.
Chairman, there are another couple of appeals which are still waiting validation, but off the road, etc. So there will be two when the planning inspectorate actually validates them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and item 6, enforcement action. Anybody got any issues on this one? Shall we just note it? Anything? Yeah. Alright, capital programme. Anything on this one? Oh yeah, there's the West Coast Lorry Park. We asked Policy and Resources for 12,000 towards it and they've refused. So, what do you want to do with this?
Chairman, I think it should be a central funding issue. I mean, there's precedence for these sorts of projects with funding central. It's essentially an asset. It's not an asset of the West Craven Area Committee. So really, we should be asking them to reconsider. It's my understanding that it is being called into the next meeting. And I think that these committee members here today that are on the Policy and Resource Committee should make a point for it. Coleman Nelson get their car parks done up, and with all the lorry issues we've had recently, drivers not having place to park properly and rest, a lorry park in good condition here is quite important for that, and it is in a pretty dire state.
But you're saying it's been called in?
It has been called in, yeah.
So it is going to go back to Policy and
You can't do anything else. It is technically called in for
Yeah,
notes.
okay. Councillor?
Yes, Chairman. As it happens, I was down at the lorry park today, and it's no surprise the potholes haven't got any smaller over Christmas. Perhaps a third to half of the site is in very poor condition. But, and I didn't actually take any pictures because we were busy on something else, but the state of the area was quite frankly deplorable. There are several, and this is for Mr. Walker's benefit, there are several areas of fly tipping which I have sent previous pictures to Mr. Walker and to the Waste Services for dealing with, which haven't been dealt with in the space of, well, probably 4-6 weeks, I would think, in the longest example. And immediately there was new fly tipping as well. And then immediately adjacent to the entrance to the household waste recycling centre, there are stacks and stacks and stacks of stuff that have been dumped there, obviously since yesterday, because it was operating yesterday, it was open. And I mean, the area is a disgrace. And Policy and Resources, and Mike wasn't there, you weren't, were you? No, but, so I'm hopeful we'll get a better outcome at the next meeting. But in Pendle we've got one lorry park, which happens to be in Earby Courts Ward. We've got one town hall, which happens to be in, I can't think which ward it is in now, actually, but it's in Nelson. We've got one depot where Mr. Walker operates from. And, you know, the area committees in Nelson aren't expected to give in and repair the town hall or the depot. So why on earth is West Craven Area Committee being asked to repair Pendle's sole lorry park? It's nonsensical. Or, you know, we can have a tit for tat for if the area committee is going to be responsible for the town hall, going to be responsible for the works depot, then fair enough, you know, we'll take it on the chin and we'll take on the lorry park because we'll be to the good. But as it is at the moment, it just looks like it's a one-way street, and people in West Craven are having to suffer a crap lorry park in all senses of the word, and at the same time are expected to have to pay extra for getting a central resource looked after. So I do hope there is a change of heart when we get to
okay. Councillor Goldthorpe.
Yeah, just for my memory, could somebody tell me who actually owns that land, that surface area again? I'm sure we've discussed this previously, but I cannot remember. Is the land owned, is the car park owned by Pendle Borough, or is it owned by, it's not owned by LCC, they're right across it. Is it owned by, obviously is it owned by
Pendle Council.
Pendle Council own that land?
Yeah.
Well, there has been precedents before where we resurfaced Cemetery Road car park in Earby when it was owned by Pendle. So I mean, I've got to say that the point raised by David there is that is a good one, a logical one, and at least some attempt at maintaining that car park should be somewhere within the Pendle. You would hope it should be somewhere within the Pendle Borough budget.
Okay,
Chairman,
well, let's hope so.
the key thing here is it's a lorry park,
Yes.
not a car park. I mean, we've got loads of car parks, and there are good reasons why one time and another different area committees might want to improve their car parks, and I think area committee has put money into certainly Cemetery Road and I think Warmsgate in Van Alswick for different reasons. But we've only got one lorry park in Pendle,
Yes.
and it happens to be here.
And it's
Yeah.
multi-use.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll argue the case
be an interesting meeting.
Okay, let's move on. Item 8, Gisborne Road footpath. Again, we had a site visit for this one. My only concern was if that boundary, if that wall that looks like it could collapse, whose fault would it be? Who would be responsible? That issue has been resolved, so I'm quite happy with this. Is everybody else? Go ahead with it. Yeah. Okay. All those in favour? Yeah. That's carried. Okay. Item 9, Border Community Town Centre. Sorry. Yes, concreting one. Yeah. Is it concreting? Yeah. Yeah. We said concreting because if they do it with tarmac, there's a chance that it will make that wall collapse. Okay. Right.
Actually, remind me, was this shared by all councils or just paid out of the,
Whoever wants it.
yeah, just those 3 councils?
Yeah. Okay, item 9, Royal Canadian Town Centre's reopening. Have we anything to add on to this one? Any further updates or not? Want to just note it? No. Yeah.
Yeah, Chairman, where are we? Top of the 3rd page, there's a bullet point there about the hanging baskets, which weren't included in the scheme. There's £600 now, and it said the cost of these will be met either from within broken back from the existing budget or from the, let's say, plan economic budget. So we've got minus £513 in that column now. So do I take it that that is going to be picked up somewhere? Has Mr Watson got some money in his back pocket and is he going to pay for these?
Chairman, we think that the overall, this is a Pendle pot, and we think there will be an underspend across other areas. So as it stands now, there's the 126133 is a surplus in this budget, so there is surplus available, but if it's fully committed here, there will be other funding which won't be used elsewhere, so or we will take it from an underspending one of the budgets that I hold for tourism, because it was an omission on our part.
Okay.
But we think it's going to be.
It's going to be funded.
It's going to be funded.
So that's fine.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just make a point? My understanding is, and looking to the left here, the town council that will pay for the filling of the hanging baskets will be placing its contract following the meeting next week. So the necessary receptacles will probably want to be with the nursery, I don't know, within the next couple of months. So it's a case of getting ordered and getting delivered, really.
Yeah. If we can pass that information back, please.
Yeah. And then the rest of the report, Chairman, talks about the website.
Yeah.
I can't see within it any sense of how great the demand has been to get included in this website. You'll recall there was a bit of a fiasco when businesses were invited to put the details in for this. The actual closing date was the day that the letters were delivered. So how many businesses have actually indicated that they want to sign up for it within Barnoldswick?
Not many, I don't think.
23.
23?
23.
As of today.
23?
They've indicated or they've signed up.
Yeah, they've signed up. We've contacted, I haven't directly, but a lot of businesses have been contacted directly. There's 22 who will be on the website so far.
of between £5,000 and £6,000 with no guarantee of any longevity is worthwhile. I appreciate it's going to be discussed at Policy Resources, but is it not too late for us to pull the plug?
Chairman, no, it's in the contract as well, so it has been approved by government and the contract's been let, so we can't withdraw from that. Chairman, we're hoping that it will grow as well. I do accept the forms were poor because they had to be printed off. We have tried to get Jordan forms so they're a lot easier, but that's a waiting list for them to be developed. But that will make things easier going forward. It was, I think, better to try and start it than actually wait for the forms to be done. But, we're hoping, Chairman, that it will grow and be a good website going forward.
Is there any plans to contact all the businesses again, or just send a leaflet through the door or something? Just try and encourage them to take it up.
Chairman, we could do some media relaunch. Again, sorry, it seems like a perennial excuse, but I need the staff resources to do looking at Town Deal and ARG and other things at the moment.
So you're under pressure.
So they are under pressure.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Gothard.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Have we got some money to remarket this at all? I accept that manpower is an issue, but I mean clearly the point made about value, 20 odd businesses. I mean, how many streets are involved? It's only now 2 or 3 businesses a street, something like that, maybe 5. The only way you're going to recover this is to actively remarket it, and that means some money and resource. It's not going to happen by itself, is it? Clearly. So I think it's something that needs to be followed up on, and maybe we've got to push it at policy and resource.
Well, if there is a bit of spare money, would Warwick Town Council be willing to do anything? If they have the money, to market it more, even if it's only just leafleting all businesses. So I don't know.
Jim, leave it with me. I'll see what
Yeah.
Mike Williams, who's leading on it, his thoughts on whether we can do that. We will use, obviously, our communications team to help us with that once it's fully launched. I'll see whether we can do some kind of leaflet or writing to people who can subsume into existing budgets.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, maybe because, you're under so much pressure and everything, maybe Warwick Town Council might be prepared to help,
Any assistance will be welcome.
Yeah. Okay, nothing else in there. Right, we'll move on. Item 10, it's that Myrtle Grove. Yeah, Councillor Wick.
Thank you, Chair. The plan looks adequate to me. I think we just now need to send this on to LCC and ask them to dig in a bit. Or a lot, yeah, it's more like it.
99%.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure that the lighting is really necessary, but I mean, we'll see what LCC can pop up, really.
Okay, everybody agree with that? Send this on to LCC. Yeah? Okay. Item 11, traffic liaison meeting. Anything on this one? No? Yes, no? Yes, Councillor?
Yes, we've got Brogden Lane. LCC have drawn up plans for the extension to the lines discussed by LCC. They're going to consult it. Now, from Brogden Lane where the farm is, right, I'd like to see that extended up to 249 Gisborne Road, because you're not going to achieve anything for the sideline coming out of Brogden Lane, because cars are parking on the pavements all the time there from the Brogden Lane corner. Is there any way we can tell LCC to
Yeah. Well, will it have to go back to traffic liaison,
I would imagine so.
I think?
We can advise.
We can advise, yeah.
We may well get discussed here at the next meeting.
Right, okay. So you got that? Councillor?
Well, Chairman, I was going to ask, it says progress on points raised, and then it says Car Road, LCC drawn up plans for extensions to the lines as discussed. And I'm assuming that means yellow lines, still yellow lines.
You are.
And then it says Combe Road, Calbrook, LCC have drawn up plans for extensions to the lines as discussed. And it says Brocken Lane,
Same.
LCC have drawn up plans for extensions to the lines as discussed. Now, for the rest of them, I can't recall
No.
these issues being discussed previously. I can't recall them being discussed at the traffic liaison meeting. I do think that any additional lines on Gisborne Road, Car Road, Brocken Lane will go down like a lead balloon. So I'm not clear what's being proposed. If they're going to be consultations from LCC, could we have sight of them at this area committee?
Can we ask them?
Actually, of course.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're dealing with
Yeah.
raising the question.
Okay. We shall ask for clarification, and we want to look at
What it means.
what it means.
Yeah.
Okay? Right, anything else? No? Okay. Item 12, public pay space protection order. Everybody happy with this one? Yeah? Yeah? Alright.
No.
Councillor Barfoot.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just slightly worried that I haven't got all the documents, and it relates to basically recommendation 3 to amend Schedule 1 of the Sports Grounds PSPO to include Burley playing fields, Irby, at the request of Irby Town Council. So, I don't know what Schedule 1 is. I presume that's just a list of every.
Sorry, Chair, again, it's just a list of all the parts and sports.
Okay. And then that clarified that. We then go into the issue, and next page, number 3, as a result of consultation with Town and Parish Councils, Irby Town Council proposing Burley playing fields, Irby, is included in the Sports Grounds PSPO to include all the prohibitions in Schedule 2. And we haven't got a Schedule 2 with this, but managed to find a Schedule 2. And most of us in this room know what Burley playing fields are. It's a open grass area adjacent to the waterfall area, which was given to the residents of Irby many years ago. And there is a children's play area, picnic area on one side of the river, or the beck, Wentcliffe Beck, and open grassland at the other. And I just suggest that some of the items in Schedule 2 are not very appropriate and not clear for an open grassland recreation area. One of it is obviously banning paid for dog walking services. Well, there's a couple of public footpaths right through the middle of it, so that's going to be some fun. But in more detail, lighting the camper fire, a lot of barbecuing goes up there in the summer with the barbecue packs in the picnic area as well. There's one or two things in it that worry me slightly that Irby Town Council haven't looked at it in detail. One of which is the prohibition of bathing and swimming. Well, funny enough, last week there was some fantastic photographs of two ladies in wetsuits bathing below the waterfalls. Very brave indeed. The children use it all through the summer, walking up through the beck, There's an old catchment pond at the top, adjacent to the picnic area, where the kids like to paddle as well. So I'm just a bit worried that there could be elements of this that are inappropriate in Schedule 2 for this unique area, which is a park, although it's got some park and picnic area in it at the other side. It's not, the children's area is not fenced in or contained. The other element that worries me is there's no mention of dogs running free there, which they do. There is no dog area. The dogs are allowed off the lead. It's one of the few areas that are there. The children's area isn't fenced. Dogs can't read maps. And there is the Wentcliffe Beck that surrounds it. And the children's area is wider than a normal play area, because adjacent to it is a picnic area as well, with a couple of picnic tables and what have you. So I'm just a bit worried. And also they're talking about 2 dogs only per person. And I think, I don't know if we changed it, but certainly I remember Councillor David Witt, when we was talking about this way back, about the number of dogs that one person could have, and I think we finished up with 4 in that discussions in terms of West Craven area. So I'm just a bit worried that if this goes ahead without real detail and understanding, that we could be stopping dogs being let off the lead in an open grassed area. I think what they're trying to do is to stop the dog walkers going up there, the professional dog walkers, and also things like picnicking. It's one of the few picnic areas left open plan, if you want, in West Craven. So I'm a bit worried that this would go through rubber stamp, Pendle. We've got it for 3 years and we could have a major problem. So I'd like a little bit more clarity and hopefully understand whether every town council are fully aware of their wish for it to go on to Schedule 2.
Through you, Chair. My understanding is that the Town Council part of the consultation and responded to the consultation and asked for the sites to be included into Schedule 2. Schedule 2 itself is a generic document that will cover all sports products.
But on that basis, all the things I've been mentioning, the kids wouldn't be allowed to paddle Wentcliffe Beck according to this. So that's what worries me. Is that have they actually read the schedule? I can understand some of it, but once this goes in, that's it. If it's on Schedule 2, everything that's prohibited on Schedule 2 will apply, will it not?
It would, yes.
Yeah. So I'm putting up a red flag. I just think we need to go back to them and just ask them, is this what they really want in terms of cracking the dog walking nut? But that's my view. I don't know if
we have time before policy and resources which will be aired again at that meeting, so I have time to go back to the committees and the town council.
So there are changes of Clark, which are, and they're running on low man hours. I don't know if Councillor David Witt's got any comments on.
Councillor Thomas.
Thanks, Chair. Bournemouth Town Council discussed this at its latest meeting. I wasn't meeting before. And it did give some comments back which don't seem to be reflected in this report. Largely about concerns of dog walking in general. But it did include thoughts about improving what areas are dedicated to what in Valley Gardens Park, as well as some other miscellaneous things like the park, etc. They don't seem to be reflected, so I don't think we should really make a decision on this until those things are included. Obviously, Ely Town Council's has got in here. Do we know what's happened to
1 and 2 is understandable, but I can't support 3 without
So delete item 3,
without
recommendation
a
3.
proper understanding of what they're signing up for. And if that means no dogs off leads in Burley playing field, in Burley recreational area, then we've got a problem. Because there's a lot of residents, particularly now, and I see them nearly every day, go up there to exercise their dogs, and it's one of the few areas where dogs can be let to run free. There's no dog walking area up there. It's not like down at the playing fields in Tops, down at the bottom there, forget the name there. And it's not a sports field, which is not like Springfield, I can understand that. But so, my concerns are, as long as this does not restrict the ability to normal residents, we can argue about 2 dogs, there's a lot of people up there have 3. I've had 3 for a number of years, but it means that 2 of us have to go dog walking. But I think those are the things that just need clarifying. It's a catch-all, isn't it? And I think when we went through in detail way back, we quickly found out that nearly every park or area that was in West Craven had a slightly different reason. Suffolk Park is a classic, So I just think we just need to be certain that this is the correct way forward. And also, if they're going to keep dogs off the children's play area, it'll have to be fenced. You can't have an open grass area with fields behind and what public footpaths through. If you're going to enforce, and that's what's the important thing. If these aren't enforceable, then it's daft. So there's issues around that area as well.
Because you have to fence off outside at back.
Yeah, well, and people walk up the beck. It's a tradition in that area, and play in the waterfalls. The kids do it every weekend through the summer. So we're trying to get people out and about a bit more, and that is one area. Along with places like Leckley Park and walks outside of the setting. So I think we need to be clear, and this report isn't quite clear, and there is some of the things that go with it should go with it are not there. There's plenty of comments there about the consultation, but what we're actually applying to it, I'm not clear on, and I think is important. I can understand the dog walking thing, and I can support that 100%. I can understand wanting to be able to enforce and take people's names and so on, but we've got to be able to know what we're putting ourselves into for the next 3 years.
Sorry, this is just a renewal of the current PSPO.
Yes, but AB wasn't on it.
No, I
AB Bill and Playing Fields wasn't on it.
AB Town Council has been a part of the consultation.
I understand that, David. I'm not having a go at you at all. I just think that I don't think it's been thought through by AB Town Council, personally. This area has an open stream running through it, like a lot of parks, and people use it. But it isn't a park, never has been.
So what do you want to do? Did you just want to delete the 3rd recommendation off?
Well, in its entirety, this part of it, they want to control the dog walkers. So the point is, that's fine, but there's a lot of things on schedule too, if this is correct. Which have a problem for that actual bit of land.
But the public space protection order has to be in place for the borough.
Yeah.
And obviously it has to be agreed for West Craven area as well. So it's scheduled to across the borough.
Right, that's fine then, but I don't agree to banning enforcement of kids not being able to play in the beck.
So the thing is that if we have recommendation 3, it's going to include all that, or we can say no.
If we say no, AB won't be able to get back into this for another 3 years.
Right, okay.
Am I right on that? And that really is what
Just
is,
resource and then the next meeting.
so I think it just needs going back and just checking that, you know, this is what you're asking for here, Vic. Are you happy that these things are going to take effect?
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor?
As far as Burley playing fields are concerned, I think there's a real risk of over-officious enforcement. We've already seen examples of that.
Yeah.
And I'm not pointing the finger at Mr Walker's Murray people, but some of the folk who work on behalf of Pendle Council, quite frankly, there's some disgraceful examples of ways in which people have been abused as a consequence of that over-efficient enforcement. And if we're going to be party to putting in place yet more restrictions, which a private sector company will come along and say, oh, well, we'll enforce them for you. You know, we're just going to be, well, I was going to say, use the word crucifying, but I'm probably not allowed to use that word nowadays. So, we are going to be castigated, at the very least, for doing it. And I agree with Mike that the waterfalls area has been one where people have gone to exercise their dogs. You know, it's not laid out as a cricket wicket or a football ground or anything like that. And I think it's, you know, putting too much into it. It's, you know, too many regulations and restrictions. And we just need to be a bit more sensible about it. So, you know, if it can be reviewed before policy and resources, and perhaps we can have a discussion of policy and resources. I'm aware that the existing PSPOs are due to expire at the end of January, so presumably something has got to be in place, but it doesn't necessarily have to include all that.
No, so...
Chairman, so I kind of pick up on what Councillor Tomwick said, because the requests from Barnoldswick Town Council, which from memory requested there to be greater areas in both Leckley Park and Harley Gardens where dogs could be exercised, is it off-lead? Yeah. Memory tells me, because at Leckley Park at the moment, dogs are okay off-lead, I could say above the wall that runs adjacent to the play area. Apart from the play area, you know, dogs can be off the lead. Below the wall, in the more, well, I won't say ornamental, the more formal part, currently, they're not allowed off the lead. And I think the suggestion was, and Councillor Tomwick that proposed it, was that the area below the wall ought to be off lead as well. Yeah. And in Valley Gardens, I think the proposal was the area behind the former Gospel Mission building, was it? That should be off lead or kit as well. So there's two issues there which don't seem to have translated into this report. And then, Chairman, I'm aware there's been a further discussion which I think the Town Council is due to discuss next week, which is about possibility of extending the dogs off lead area at Victory Park. But that hasn't currently been raised by the Town Council. They're due to have it on the agenda for next week's meeting. And then there are issues, Chairman, about the skate park, where the current requirement is no dogs at all, which there might be disagreement amongst colleagues here, but to my mind it's utterly impractical because there's a footpath comes down and people thou shalt not have dogs in this area, I'm not quite sure how they're going to sort of navigate around the park. And similarly, the junior cycle circuit, that's a no dogs at all, when it would be more realistic and reasonable to have a requirement for dogs to be on leads. So there are all sorts of issues revolving around the fact that Victory Park is essentially just a collection of playing pitches, but it's called a park, and so rationalising or balancing the needs of different park users is very, very difficult. But it comes back to the over-officious enforcement, where we have some very distressing examples where people have been abused by officers purporting to work on behalf of this council, which, quite frankly, I think any one of us would be ashamed that there is any association whatsoever between that company, those individuals, and ourselves. And I just think that we're giving that company a means to generate loads of cash at the expense of local people who are frankly innocent of any offence that would constitute being offensive in our book. So I think the whole thing needs to be re-looked at, to be honest. But,
right, okay.
So we don't have time.
Yeah, you've got issues with all this, so do we want to move any of these recommendations, or do we just want to leave it up to policy and resources?
I think, Chairman, we should flag up the fact that...
Flag up all these issues
Yes.
to policy and resources,
Yeah.
which I'm sure you will, and let them make the decision. So we're not going to make any decision on this report tonight.
Well, but we should be saying what we think as an area committee.
Yeah.
We don't think it's, Burley playing fields.
And the issues
but
of
then there's
no support.
the Electric Park, Valley Gardens,
Yeah.
Victory Park. We want to sort of raise these as issues.
They all need to be
I'll go on
amended
to
before
Yeah.
One size does not fit all.
No, it doesn't.
And we spent a lot of time, 2 or 3 years back, at the beginning of this process, examining that, finding that out, and putting different things in place right across Pendle. The business of not having dogs on sports fields isn't right across Pendle.
No.
We've got playing fields in Pendle where dogs still can go on them because it was too expensive to put a fence around them.
Yeah.
And that's over on the junction between Nelson and Barrowford.
Okay, so all these issues can be flagged up and sent to policy and resources.
Sorry. The
Yeah.
public space, the Schedule 2 is a generic schedule for across the borough.
Well,
Borough-wide.
then it can't be, you can't have.
No, we can't do it.
No, so they're already in, Chair. So
Well,
these are already,
not
this is-
in
this is
not in
refresh
parts
agreed
of-
in 2000.
Well, they're not in Burley playing fields at the moment.
No,
No, but
no,
no,
the
that's
town
not.
council are wanting.
Yes, I
So,
understand that.
and I accept your comments. I can question the town council.
And there's no acceptance of public right of way. The point about enforcement is well made. I mean, a number of these areas, one of the reasons why you've got a very detailed situation at Suf Park, because of public right of way. At cemeteries, with public right of way through them, how are you going to stop somebody walking through a cemetery on a public right of way footpath who's got 3 dogs when he should only have one according to the PSPO thing? I don't know. But that's the problem with it, David, I think. It is that sort of detail.
It needs a proper discussion, and open it up.
Sorry, I'm dragging this along. I feel the original PSPOs will have come in following the consultation. These will have been the issues that were raised at that time to create that schedule that you're debating now. These are simply a refresh of that schedule.
I remember it well here in the West Craven Area Committee. I remember David going through in detail of what was possible in the various green spaces, parks, whatever, particularly in Van Oswald. And it was a number of different things that we had to go through. And we kicked it back, I think 3 times, David, back to the parish and town councils again, because we weren't happy about what was going into it. I understand that's there, but if you're going to enforce these rules, then they need to be enforceable. And I'm suggesting some of them are not, and some of them are certainly not desirable. And you're going to look great, aren't you, dragging kids out of Wetcliffe back in the middle of the summer because they're breaking rule number 22 of bathing. And I can understand the odd job's worth doing that. You know, so, and then you're going to want to demand their name and address, and it's an offence if they don't do it. I think we're getting into a weird and wonderful place, and I think it needs to be sorted.
Yeah, well, I'm sure policy and resources will do that.
And I mean, fundamentally, the Van Oswald Town Council has seen, you know, where these PSPLs have worked and haven't worked, and we need some sort of process to be able to amend them into the parks that we own. I mean, the things that we've outlined in Valley Gardens and Leckliffe, I mean, we did discuss that at the Town Council, and I thought it would be on here today, but it hasn't been. And, you know, if it's just going to get carte blanche accepted at the end of January, because it needs to be, then we need some way to be able to amend that in good time. And waiting another 3 years for it to be done just isn't on. It's too long of a process.
Yeah. I think them comments need to be added, that we need to be able to vary that go to policy and resources, make sure they go there. Okay? Alright, let's move on. Item 13, Northbound Community Centre. Again, we had a meeting, Teams meeting, Teams or whatever you want to call it, on computer. Councillor Wick.
Chairman, I mean, the report's self-explanatory. There have been some interest from residents about having the community centre back up and running. And the question, the running costs at £15,000, which have been provided by Together Housing. And I honestly don't know how that is made up in terms of whether it's repairs and maintenance, business rates, insurance and the like. So I wonder whether we could seek further detail on that. But also, Chairman, I've been exercising my mind about if there is a desire to re-establish the Residents Association and its use of a community centre, how can we find the wherewithal to actually get that to happen? And despite the fact that following the last item, the Town Council may not be too well disposed towards the area committee, I wonder whether we could sound out the Town Council to see whether they would be willing to put funding into the community centre up at Northbound. And so my proposal would be that we ask the Town Council if there would be any interest in helping to fund the reopening of Northbound Community Centre, and seek a meeting between the Town Council, ourselves, and any potential proto-residents group that there might be to explore the way forward.
Okay. And you were going to make inquiries in the neighbourhood, so what level of interest there was?
Yeah, well, between Christmas and COVID, Chairman, Family Whip have been stricken with COVID. stress that we both had double negative LFTs in the past 2 days.
Right, okay. Well, I should hope so, she won't be here.
We wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Gothorpe.
It seems like a plan to me. I think we should involve Ely Town Council. I know they're a bit stretched like a lot of people at the moment and haven't got a full team, but I think, you know, they are Ely Town Council. There is an opportunity. I think you're going to have to do a little bit of marketing up there, which we've done before, I guess, for various different things, to see if there is a will for people to come together and would they be interested in using it. But to do this without the involvement of the Town Council is nonsense, really.
If my memory serves me right, which might not be, I remember when Northbound Community Centre were built, there was a residents' association up there.
Yeah.
What happened to it, I don't know. Anyway, we can only ask. Okay. Item 14, Euravia. Right, we've only had 3 complaints about Euravia testing orders. Have you anything else to add, Dave?
The officers reported, you know, we're doing some further monitoring possibly over the next 2 weeks. Then if we found nothing at that time, we did actually say how we can close the complaint because there's nothing pursued really on.
And my understanding is that if the complaint gets shut down and that, Euravia will then talk to us?
Yeah, there is a comment from Craven, yes, and they will be willing to discuss or enter into a working group following conclusion of these investigations.
Yeah. Which, yeah, there you go. Anybody else? Anything to add, Councillor?
Well, I do begin to lose the will to live, Jan. The whole point of raising this, how many months ago, I've lost track now.
Long time.
The whole point of it was to try and get up a liaison group, which would be a harmonious coming together of company, council and residents to discuss any issues that there may be and to have a sort of problem-solving approach to dealing with them. And it just seems to have become an adversarial issue where, you know, the company is saying, well, you know, if the problem goes away, we're willing to sit down with you and talk about the problem. But, you know, I don't know how to get around this because the model that I was basing this on was the approach that we had with Union Oil Global, where we had a very fruitful way of working with them that led to them investing money, you know, and getting rid of the problem or minimising the problem. And here we have an approach that just seems to be antagonistic.
Well, we're just going to have to leave it on the agenda, wait till monitoring's finished and see if we can pursue it further then.
Yeah. Chairman, you see, I don't think, you know, we're not looking to prove that there's a statutory nuisance. I think what we're wanting to do is just have a meeting, sit down and say, look, there are these issues, what can we do about them?
Well, we're just going to have to wait and see.
It's rather ironic that both companies are Canadian owned. For its worth.
Yeah, well there you go. Okay, so we'll have to leave it for next time. Okay, 15, formation of car parking at land at Harrison Street. Where do you want to go with this one? Sorry, Councillor.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I think this is a bit of nonsense, to be honest. Different levels. I think there'd be a great deal of support for additional dental provision in the area. Clearly, there's a planning application in that we will consider in due course. And as part of that planning approach, the applicants have indicated that they would relocate the Park Avenue treatment facility into an expanded Harrison Street Pendle facility. And that's to be welcome because that's a bit of a contentious issue in itself. And even taking into account that consolidation, there would be a net increase in treatment rooms, which would presuppose there'd be an increase in dentists, which again is a good thing, because people struggle to get them. But then we end up with this strip of land being proposed to be used for car parking. Now, in itself, to create the off-street car parking spaces, you're going to lose a load of on-street car parking spaces. So the net increase in vehicle spaces is much less than you'd currently, well, on the face of it, you would get. Secondly, my recollection is that this amenity land was actually offered to Barnsley Town Council as part of the community asset transfer, and I thought that was in trade. So, surely the Town Council would have some locus in that respect. I don't know where that's got to, but it's an angle. And then the third thing is that this land was gifted to Barnsley Craven District Council back in the day after the Second World War for use as a recreation area. Now, I don't think there is any covenant on it, but nevertheless, the people who gifted it after the Second World War clearly intended it to be a recreation area. And then the final thing is, if you are going to create some car parking spaces on this land, why not do it sensibly? Instead of having a strip that does away with most of your frontage onto Harrison Street, or part of the frontage onto Harrison Street, why isn't there a proper car park created adjacent to the dental clinic? And the more sensible thing would be if any car park was created where the current play area is, the play area relocated slightly further into the land, and then you leave the bulk of the land untouched and available for recreational use as it is at the moment.
And now to cost.
Well, but that's the dental companies. It's a private company. It's for them to deal with. I don't think Pendle Council should be saying, oh yeah, you can have half the frontage, which is effectively what they're wanting, to create a few car parking spaces, which will be even less because you're actually doing away with the on-street parking that is currently there. And then you're actually sterilising the use of the land behind because you've given all your frontage away. So, I'm not saying that Pendle Council will give it to you, they sell it, but it's like, selling off the sort of more soluble strip of land and leaving yourself with a lump behind that you can't do what with. So I think on all levels that we ought to be saying to P&R, well, we don't think this is the most sensible way forward. There are better ways of addressing the car parking requirement, if there is such, and that perhaps all concerned should get round the table come up with a sensible solution rather than a nonsensical
Yeah.
one that we've got here.
Councillor Hall.
Yeah, I mean, David beat me to it really. I mean, it jumps out at you like a, it really does. I mean, it also puts the play area where leaving it there betwixt the car parking area as well. Normally you would look at that and say, right, let's create a decent area around it, the clinic, and that's where the cars want to be. So yeah, I mean, it's a nonsense as it stands at the moment. The other question I was going to ask is does this surgery take National Health on their list, or is it purely private? Do we know? Do we care?
Chairman, they have had NHS patients. I'm not sure that we're currently taking them.
I fully support what's been said on
Councillor
that.
Tomlin.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I'm against the whole idea of putting additional parking on this. I mean, I really question the necessity of having additional parking for the dental practice. I mean, it says in the document it's needed for planning reasons, but surely a dentist surgery should have a catchment, a local catchment of the residents around it. And so the patients that are on the register for the dentist should be within walking distance. So why do you need a massive car park? Probably the amount of space that the cars are taking up on this plan is probably maybe half the ground space of the dental practice, the current site. And that's on top of the already existing car parking. I mean, that is a nonsense. There shouldn't need to be that much room created for cars in this already, pretty densely packed area. The dentist should be within walking distance of the patients that it has. And creating more car dependency by requiring this huge car park is ridiculous. The second thing is, I think if we do have a car parking scheme in the area, they should be putting the money towards this. Back in LCC, making this, and we solved the residents parking in the area there, we solved an issue with the school, and the dentist gets the car parking space it needed. For planning reasons, which I disagree with in the first place, but I mean, if it must happen, we've got a scheme here which is, less than 2 minutes walk away, and doesn't take away amenity land.
Okay.
So there you go, absolutely opposed to dispensing of this.
Right, so the recommendation is that we don't recommend this to Policy and Resources, but we ask them that we go back and discuss it for a more sensible option.
Well, Chairman, I think I propose that there should be a meeting of interested parties, which is not the estates people and Liberator.
No.
And we just say, well, we want an extra pound of flesh. Thank you very much. I mean, let's be honest, Chairman, what people in Van Oswald would like is a proper health centre that would have facilities for not only the dentists but the doctors too. It would have adequate car parking and adequate everything else.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we've just got inadequate this, inadequate that, and inadequate the other.
Right, but that's not what this is. So what do we want to tell Policy and
Well,
Resources?
if we sit down with them, we could say,
recommend.
have a health centre.
I totally agree with Councillor Tom Wick. We've got a car park, we've went out, we've done a site visit where the school is. It's only, 5 minutes walk? I mean, we would be better off putting money into that rather than this. This is a no-brainer. I mean, the amount of children that use that piece of land in summertime, I mean, they put the tents out, they play football. I mean, it is a green area for the children to play on. If people cannot walk a few hundred yards, I mean, this, at the back of this, I mean, this spare land, what the LCC have, and we make that into a car park, we don't really need to touch this. We don't need to touch it at all. Just learn to get out of your cars and walk, and put the money into that.
Okay, So, the recommendation is that we don't recommend this to policy and resources to be declared surplus to requirements, and that we go back to the company and ask for a meeting with, do we want to do it from this committee, or do you want policy and resources to do it?
Well,
Councillor Gordon?
I think what we're all saying, and I take the point about further discussions, we're all saying that this proposal is unacceptable to us,
Yeah.
in terms of this committee.
So
For all the reasons that Councillor David and Tom and Jenny have said, it's a camel anyway. So we're totally against that. This as it's presented, so we cannot recommend it to anybody.
Right.
I don't think.
Okay.
And we say go back to the drawing board. But
Yeah? Okay.
So you're not asking for me, you're not asking for me.
So we don't want to meet with them or anything?
well,
If we can have a place to say, look, we've got a plan here,
Yeah, ask them to put some money into that.
there you go. I mean, they probably spend what, 20 grand on those parking spaces if you take into account dropping the curb and all the subsoil and everything.
services as well.
So, if you can add a meaningful contribution to this, getting the parking spaces for the economy, and that would be suitable for planning if they had arrangements with this land that we discussed earlier.
Probably.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll hedge my bets.
Well, you might enlarge it.
Okay. So we're recommending we're not disposing of this land, and that if they want to make a contribution
To that.
to this scheme
Mosley Street.
As a potential solution.
Yes.
as a potential solution, we
But
welcome
if
that.
we can achieve a meeting to discuss with them, and I would certainly throw the health centre into the dynamics.
Right, if you want to have a meeting with them, who do you want to go? This committee, or do you want to do it?
Do it from this committee, but I mean, I indicated that Barnoldswick Town Council had an interest in the land, so the Town Council as well.
Right, okay. We should sort it out. Alright, let's move on.
I'm not sure when that, sorry, just to clarify, would it not be P&R that would then organise this meeting? I know you say want to, but would we not recommend P&R?
With members from this.
It's just like a proactive approach to say, you've got a problem,
Yeah, that's,
we've got,
this is why it's getting confusing.
I'm hoping that the request for the disposal won't get to P&R.
Yeah.
Right.
And maybe I'm being a bit wistful there, but
We can only try.
Well,
Well, this item is going to go to P&R wherever, isn't it? Right.
Why is it?
why?
Why is it here?
because they're asking for.
Because they're asking for it. So
Yeah.
is it on the agenda for P&R? The next agenda, do you know?
Well, but Chairman, if we say as an area committee we're not interested in disposing of the land, declaring it surplus,
It
that
shouldn't
should kill it
go.
then.
It shouldn't go to the P&R.
No, well, it will go to P&R, but the recommendation will be that it won't be declared surplus, isn't that?
My understanding is there's a limit on the amount in the constitution that it goes to P&R over a certain amount. Can we clarify it? It's not going to this P&R committee anyway, because we've got
Right.
the agenda. So let's clarify that. But I think it's this, sorry John, I think it's this committee's decision, but
Okay.
I think we need to check the constitution on that.
Yeah, that's why I'm going to be confused on this one. Right, okay, so, and then from this committee, we'll arrange to meet with them. Okay? Right, we're clear now.
Good.
Right, item 16, item for discussion, ambulance response time. Councillor Rick?
Chairman, you'll recall, or members of the committee have been here for some time, you'll recall that we used to monitor the position with ambulance response times,
Yeah, we did.
and we had quite a healthy dialogue with North West Ambulance Service over a period of several years. That's fallen by the wayside. of late, I've been briefed by the people involved about a couple of distressing examples of very extended response times and suggestions that people should, bundle people into the private vehicle and take them to hospital themselves, which clearly can't go into the details of those. But it seemed to me, Chairman, that given the fact that residents are flagging this up as an issue, increasingly, it seems, that we should try and pick up with the North West Ambulance Service about the monitoring that we've done previously and find out where we are in the current time.
Okay.
And I'm very sensitive, very alert to the fact that we are not in normal times, that a lot of the health services are very stretched, and understandably so. But if, as happened previously, the focus on the response times leads to an improvement in the circumstances for people locally, then I think that's all to the good. So I think it's important that we try and pick this issue up and do what we can as an area committee to effect some change for the better. So I would propose that we seek to have a dialogue with North West Ambulance Service regarding response times.
Okay, Councillor Northbound.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think at the very least this committee should have that sort of information back in front of us. There's a lot of comments being made out and about, and I can quote one. Was told 10 hours was the waiting time, and that was a relative. Not obviously for an emergency, as he said, they were feeling very unwell, an elderly relative. And so those sort of 10-hour waits mean you jump in the car and you take your relative, rightly or wrongly, to an emergency or accident situation. So we should know, I think, the times, the information we used to have, and Ken used to spend a lot of time and effort analysing those figures. But I think because of our position on the border as well, it's always been an issue in West Craven in normal times. None of us around this table, other than gossip perhaps, or even comments or individual knowledge of relatives, actually know how good or how bad it is in West Craven. And I think because of that we should have reintroduce that intercourse. That was very useful at the time, and I think now even more importantly so.
Okay. Alright, that agreed? Yeah. Right, okay. Item 17, outstanding item, Victoria Road, Earbeck. Have we had a reply back from LCC yet?
Not that I'm aware of,
No.
Chair, no, this reports to be submitted to future meetings, so we'll chase LCC for comments.
Okay. Traffic issues on Skipton Road, Barlake. Waiting update from LCC. Has that come through? No? Still waiting. Still waiting for that. LCC Airways, online reporting system. Reporting system. Request to add existing gullies. Has any progress been made on that one?
I think the engineers are going to get in contact
Yeah.
with
Scott Waldley's emailed today to ask if I've got the list.
Right.
Well, I had the list several months ago, but I'll have to recreate it.
Right, okay. Okay, item 18, exclusion of public and press. Very sorry, but we're going to have to ask you to leave. You as well, Larry.
With a staff car up. Get them on.
Then
Cold in here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Heating's still on, but it doesn't tell me.
It didn't on there.
Well, it's on here, isn't it?
Eh?
It's on here.